Chapter 3. The Calendar in His Head. Weeks went by, and Ethan built a map. He built it in the only place he had that was wholly his own, the dark behind his eyes, in the long, quiet hours after the apartment slept. The body needed its sleep and took it ruthlessly, but there was always an hour, sometimes two, when the small frame lay still and breathing, and Ethan's grown mind ran free behind it. He used those hours the way a starving man uses a hidden store of food, carefully and never all at once. The map was the future. His future, the one he had already lived. He started near and worked outward because near was clearest. 1994, he knew in his bones he was living it. 1995, 1996, the small things. Emma would be born in the spring of 1996, in the rain, and his mother would name her after a grandmother Ethan had never met. The apartment's boiler would fail one winter, and they would all sleep in the front room around a space heater, and David would call it camping to make the children laugh. The corner store on the next block would change owners twice. Small things. But the small things were the joints of the world, the places where the great structure of fate could be pried at, and Ethan turned each one over and set it carefully in its place on the map. Then he reached past his own childhood, and the map began to change. The near years were sharp. The far years were not. Ethan discovered this the way you discover the edge of your own eyesight, not all at once, but by reaching for something and finding it blurred. The events of his 20s came back to him in clear, hard detail. Dates, names, the precise shape of his own mistakes. But the further out he reached, the more the picture frayed. By his 30s, it was less a map than a weather report. This decade, roughly this. This year, something like this. He could remember that a great financial crash came near the end of the 2000s and gutted the country, but the exact month slid away from him when he grabbed at it. He could remember which small companies grew into giants, but not always when. This was not, he understood, a flaw in the gift. It was a flaw in him. He had not been a man who paid close attention to history while he lived it. He had been tired and busy and small, and the world had washed over him mostly unremarked. A different man, a watchful man, might have come back with an almanac in his head. Ethan had come back with the memories of someone who had spent 44 years, not really looking. It was a bitter thing to learn about yourself. He learned it, and he set it on the map too, because a weapon you do not understand will cut your own hand. Near is sharp. Far is fog. Spend the sharp years well, and do not bet your life on the fog. He repeated it to himself in the dark until it was a rule, like the rule about being seen. And then, one night, he followed the map all the way out to its far wall, and the wall was a year, and the year was 2027. He had been avoiding it. He knew that now. For weeks he had let himself drift among the small, bright joints of the near future, boilers and corner stores and his sister's name, and had not once turned his mind toward the place where his first life ended. Some animal part of him had flinched from it, the way you flinch from a stove you have already been burned on. But a map with a blank place on it is not a map, and Ethan made himself look. 2027. The year the sky changed color. He remembered it the way you remember the start of a nightmare, in fragments that do not connect. The purple-green light first seen over the Pacific, dismissed as a trick of the atmosphere. The reports that were not believed. The first people who woke up changed, and the names the news invented for them before the news itself went dark. And then the long unraveling, 9 years of it, 2027 to 2036, the slow drowning of the ordinary world under a tide that fell out of a wound in the sky. He had lived through all 9 years as one of the swept away, the weak, the unawakened, running and hiding and burying people, until at the very end there was no one left to bury him. That was the wall. That was where his map stopped, not because the years after didn't happen, but because he had not survived them. You cannot remember a future you did not live to see. Past 2036, there was only the cold place without stars, and the voice that was not a voice and the single word, again. Ethan lay in his crib in 1994 and stared up into the dark at a future 33 years away. And for the first time since he had woken in this small body, he was afraid in a way that had nothing to do with his father. Because it changed the shape of everything. He had thought in the first wild grief, holding his father's living face in his mind, that the task was simple. Terrible but simple. Save David. Spare Susan the widowhood. Keep Emma from the gray childhood that waited, and the boy Marcus from the water. Pull his small family off the tracks before the train of 1999 came through, and then live. Just live. Have the ordinary life that the first Ethan had been cheated of. Now he saw further, and the seeing was cold. It did not matter how many tragedies he pried loose from the joints of the near years. It did not matter if he made his father rich and his mother happy, and his sister safe and his friend grown. Because at the far end of the map, past all of it, the sky was still going to tear open in 2027, and the tide was still going to come, and the tide did not care whether a man was happy. The tide took the weak. And every single person Ethan loved, every person he was bending his whole impossible second life to save, was like the first Ethan, weak. Saving his father from a truck in 1999 only meant his father would be alive in 2027, to be swept away by something far worse. The thought was so large and so cold that the small body could not hold it. Ethan did not cry this time. He had cried himself empty already, twice over, and what was left was harder and quieter and more useful. He simply lay there and let the size of it settle over him, and he made himself look at it without flinching, the way he had made himself look at the year 2027. So it is not enough to change the small joint, he thought. It is not enough to be clever, or lucky, or rich. The thing that killed my first world is still coming, and being happy will not stop it. I will have to be strong. He did not yet know what that meant. He was 2 years old, he could barely stand. He had no idea, lying there, that strength of the kind the tide respected was not a thing of money or muscle, that it had a ladder all its own with rungs that had names, that the first rung was already waiting somewhere inside his own small chest like a coal banked under ash. All of that was still ahead of him, past the next chapter and the one after. But the resolve came first, before the means, the way it always does. Ethan Cole, 2 years old, lay in the dark and looked all the way down the length of his second life to the wall at the end of it, and made the map larger than one date and one truck. Save his father, yes. But that was only the first step now, the nearest joint on a road that ran all the way to a torn sky 33 years away. He had thought he had 5 years. He understood now, a great deal more than that to do, and the clock had already started.